If things can be made more efficiently, then there can be a way for people of all kinds of audience sizes to be able to cultivate their project and maybe not make a profit. But hey, not everything's about making a profit. If you can break even on something and you made something cool, that adds value to the world.
Iron Lung is a horror movie that adapts the indie horror game of the same name, and here to talk to me about it is the film's writer, director, star, executive producer, and editor, Markiplier. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, no problem. Thanks for having me.
For anybody that hasn't played Iron Lung, could you give us the top line on what this is all about?
Yeah, end of the universe, prisoner welded in a submarine, dropped in an ocean of blood. That's pretty much the entire summary of it.
This is a movie that you developed in pretty close collaboration with the game's developer and creator, Dave Szymanski. Can you talk a little bit about what that collaboration was like for you?
Yeah, so I reached out to him a little bit after playing the game, asking if I could make a movie about it. There was not much more fanfare than that. It was just, I was like, hey, can I make a movie? And he was like, sure. But then from there, I needed to know so much more about the universe. And so I would ask him questions. The lore update had come out at that point. So we learned a bit more about the factions that were there. And so I was like, okay, I know that there's a universe and I know that there are factions. I know there's people. Can you tell me more about like what caused all this and what else is? And he goes, well, I didn't really think about that. Because he hadn't needed to. A lot of it was left up to mystery. So he leaned on that kind of mystery to help it. And honestly, I didn't really need to know all the answers. But we worked in tandem. I was helping out with coming up with some ideas. I would chuck it at him and he would say like, no, this isn't really in universe. This doesn't feel quite right. Then I would come up with this horrible idea and he'd be like, no, that's cool. I like that. And it was that. It was like, just kind of feeling it out until we got to a point where the story was starting to really feel cohesive. And it's like, okay, this is the story we want to tell in this, 2-hour window that we have. And then I started to flesh it out. Okay, how can I connect all the narrative bits together? How can I reinforce these things? And from there, just growing and growing.
Were there any like red lines that he had of things that he really wanted to see or really didn't want to see in this movie?
He didn't want it to be overtly supernatural. He had some ideas for what was the cause. He kind of had a conceptual like feeling for it, much more in the eldritch god range than being purely about, ghosts and magic. But there's a lot of people that would probably have theological debates about the delineations between those, but that's for another person. I just wanted to respect what his universe was and where he wanted to take it. He's already said, and he's perfectly okay with them kind of the game having a different canon than the movie and them kind of existing side by side, and they're not direct relations. So it's an adaptation that kind of expands it into a different direction, but not so different that it needs to be its own like separate thing with a different name. I wanted it always to pay homage to the original game and its core ideas of being, this isolationist game about like distorted perspectives and not really knowing what's going on outside and having more questions than answers. So he was a very good guardrails on making sure that it still fit, even if there was some room to expand.
And you're referencing Iron Lung's relation to one of my favorite subgenres of horror, which is cosmic horror, this idea of elder gods and questions that we can't quite fathom answers to. What were some of your cinematic touch points for your work on Iron Lung in that sort of space?
I think that I haven't actually read official stuff about Cthulhu or like those Eldritch gods, but I've seen its, influence in everywhere. That's kind of actually what the Eldritch gods do. I've seen its influence everywhere, but I don't know the original language. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from one of my favorite horror movies of all time is Event Horizon.
Yes. I was hoping you would say that.
It's such a iconic, stylistically beautiful movie that really only suffers from its editing. His style and storytelling is a little dated for when it came out. I think that's its only flaw. I think otherwise it's just a really cool experience that just set the tone for some of these space horror movies. So I draw a lot of inspiration. I wouldn't say so much directly from that, but the concept of this kind of instantaneous event causing such untold thing and revealing like there is a hidden world behind there that is so horrible you not only couldn't survive it, but you can't comprehend it and that kind of thing. So I think there's some inspiration to draw from that.
And not even just in the tone of the film, but I also think that in a lot of the production design, there seems to be a lot of love for Event Horizon there. Was that an influence on, because obviously for a single location horror movie, the set is crucially important because you're spending so much time in that. So can you talk a little bit about designing the set and whether you were calling out to Event Horizon there as well?
Nothing specifically there because we had the game to inspire what the look of it was. And it was very retro in terms of the game's graphics. So we kind of put that into a certain time when we were making this thing. The technology had to be old because they wouldn't put anything super valuable in here. It would all have to be disposable things they wouldn't mind losing. So the computer's ancient. You can hear a hard drive clicking, and it's like, this is the future. They would at least have SSDs in there. But they have this cobbled together old technology in a rusting, clearly dilapidated, and the only thing it has going for it is that it's sturdy as hell. It's just a lump of iron, and kind of that was more the style of everything than what, like, paying particular homage to some things in Event Horizon. You have the tube, you have the pipes, you have the console, you have the computer in the back, and then the camera button. And so those are as close to a recreation or elevation of the game's concept of what those are as anything. The style of the computer screen, I drew a little inspiration from StarCraft cinematic. Like if you saw the original StarCraft 2 cinematic, the orange computer screens, that was the inspiration for the computer screens there. I actually made them myself alongside my editors. They helped out with that because it was just very specific. I wanted a real bare bones but orange look. Yeah, so it pulls from a lot of different things.
Why would there be flames? You did test this thing, right?
This is the test.
Something I'm really interested in as it relates to the idea of video game adaptations, as somebody that's been watching these for my entire life, certainly, is this idea of the video game movie curse, which I believe in recent years, that conception has really started to crack. What do you feel like are the main drivers of that perception of video game movies starting to be broken down?
Well, you have certain levels still, and there's always going to be a certain hokey video game adaptation that comes out that may or may not be true to the original experience. Some people may look at this one and be like, it's not a true adaptation of the original. But when it comes to the transformative art form of adapting any kind of story to another medium, there needs to be some transformation to it. And I think we're seeing a bit more flexibility with that in terms of the storytelling, for better or for worse. Some things push it too far, but I think it benefits from already having games blurring the line between cinema and gaming anyway. Like with God of War, not to its discredit, it's a good game, but I never finished playing it. But I finished watching it. I turned to YouTube and I watched compilations of all the cinematics and cutscenes, and that told the whole story. I got a lot of enjoyment from just watching it, and I don't usually watch people play games, even if I am a Let's Player. So I think it benefits from already having that line blurred, which gives it a certain level of seriousness, which is taken. People can look at a game and not be like, it's just like, it's a silly little nothingness. I've seen some fan-made Minecraft stories told that aren't even really in a cinematic way, but are just like a kind of this horror story that's being narrated, clearly fabricated, but it's compelling, right? And people can find it compelling because they are already past the hurdle of thinking that it's silly. And so the more people that get past that hurdle, the less these filmmakers might have to try to think that they have to be a little silly or catering. They can actually tell the compelling stories with some of these elevations of the art form. If even cinema is an elevation from certain game aspects. I know God of War is getting a series made out of it. Is it going to be an elevation? I actually don't know. So that's interesting.
Yeah, another element of these that I do find interesting is the idea of taking a video game, which is an active experience, and turning it into a passive experience in terms of being a film. So for you directing and certainly starring this movie, what were the important things that you wanted to hit to make sure that you felt like the audience was being brought into this world and along for the ride with you?
Right. So a lot of the perspective of the audience coincides with the main character. They're hearing things pretty much one-to-one with what he's hearing. His distortion of reality outside the sub and his perception of it is oftentimes in his head and unspoken, because then the audience can draw their own conclusions. The story is very much about, for me anyway, it's very much about perspective and distorted perspectives and drawing conclusions from perspectives without all the information. The camera doesn't show you everything outside the sub, and it shows you in a distorted way. There was some people that saw the first trailer and there's a picture shown right in the beginning of the trailer and they were like, oh, it's a gorilla covered in cobwebs. I had never seen that before, but now that's all I can see, right? I know what that's supposed to be, but everyone's like, it's a gorilla in cobwebs. I'm like, now I only see a gorilla in cobwebs. So it's very much like that for the people that he's talking to. They don't see what he sees, but they have an opinion of what it is. That perspective is different. Like the main character even tells them what he's seeing, and they're like, it's not that, that kind of conflict in there allows the audience to draw their own conclusions. And the more that I can bring them in, I mean, there's even one part where I basically flashbang him, but that's true. It's true to what the main character was also experiencing. That's what he felt. So I want them to feel what he feels.
There aren't enough of us left to be throwing lives away, but there is too much at stake not to take calculated risks.
For any YouTube creator to make the jump to making their first feature film is such a huge deal these days. We've obviously seen like the Filippo brothers have this massive success with Talk to Me. To your mind, as you walk away from your experience producing Iron Lung, what's your main sort of lesson that you've learned here?
I feel like there is a lot of inefficiencies in the system. This probably feels very clinical, but I do believe that nowadays there are so many different technological advances that allows more and more people to make higher level things easier. DaVinci Resolve is an example. I'm not sponsored by DaVinci, but it's the editing software I use. You can edit, color, do the sound, and do the visual effects all in the same software, and it's way cheaper than a lot of alternatives, and I think way better. That's a whole other conversation. But a lot of the filmmaking process is split up into so many different disciplines that you have to have completely separate camps for to doing this. And this is all outside of the actual like build a set, put a camera in there. Like the actual post-production part of it, I feel like is extremely inefficient. There are some inefficiencies in the filmmaking, but there are also some realities like you can't get around doing some things and it's going to be hard. But when it comes to the after part of it, it does get very bogged down. And I think that one lesson that I have is that YouTube and content creators in general have a unique perspective where they have multidisciplinary skills. Multidisciplinary skills in terms of editing and filming and doing the audio and the sound mix and all those different things. And if you think about it, there's no difference. The only difference is skill level in terms of making a YouTube video to making a movie. From the editing perspective, it is just a skill gap. And it's a big skill gap. Don't get me wrong. It's huge. But theoretically, you can go from A to B if you develop your skills right, and you could do what I did. However, caveat, I have 38 million subscribers. I know that I'm speaking from a perspective where a lot of people don't have the same starting advantage that I do, and likely many of them never will. And that is unfortunate. But at the same time, I still think that there is an avenue. If things can be made more efficiently, if things can become more accessible, especially with independent distribution, then there can be a way for people of all kinds of audience sizes to be able to cultivate their project, assemble the crew, make the product, finish it, and then release it on their own terms, and maybe not make a profit. But hey, not everything's about making a profit. If you can break even on something and you made something cool, that adds value to the world. And I think that more of that is always going to be good.
Well, Mark, we're so happy to talk to you about Iron Lung today. Thank you so much for taking the time. Iron Lung is in theaters on January 30th. For all of your other submarine in an ocean of blood needs, you're already in the right place. IGN.